Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you all for coming tonight. So my name is Besso. I have been on Coastal Council for the last 6 years, and I'm very happy to be given this opportunity to actually talk to everyone. I'm not running again for council, so I have no vested interest. I would just like to start, because I know I tend to talk a little bit too much, so I want to stay on time. So my purpose today is to convey to the electorate the same message and information that I gave in a presentation March the 6th, 2014 at a meeting of the Greater Vernon Advisory Committee. I'm trying to convey this message in order for the electorate to be able to make a more informed decision at the upcoming referendum. So last March, my purpose at GVAC was to convince the politicians that a peer review of the proposed Master Water Plan Option 2, which was what they had selected, was necessary before going to referendum. They listened, but they were not moved. So just to set the stage, what is GVAC? Greater Vernon Advisory Committee is a committee of the Regional District of the North Okanagan. It is comprised of 3 representatives from the City of Vernon, 2 representatives from Coldstream, and 1 electoral area director from Area B and 1 from Area C. So the presentation I gave to them, so keep that in mind, it's this presentation slightly modified, was called Our Water Future. And just to set the stage, the referendum on borrowing that we're going to do, the green area in this map shows the people that will be eligible to vote. So that is the eligible voting area. All of Coldstream, all of Vernon, and a small portion of areas C and B are on the Greater Vernon Water Utility catchment area. And that's the map for it. And geographically, just to set the stage also, we basically have 2 main water sources that we get for our water at Greater Vernon, and that is the Duto Creek water treatment plant that treats the water from the Aberdeen Plateau, and the Mission Hill water treatment plant that is very close to the college up here on Reservoir Road, and it treats all the water from Kalamalka Lake. So 80% of the drinking water, the domestic drinking water, comes from Kalamalka Lake, and 20% of the domestic drinking water comes from Duto. And most of you are familiar, that's an air photo, and that shows Kalamalka Lake and the whole stream of Elgin. So what I said to GVAC was that the goal of GVAC, I reiterated to them, to me, was to evaluate the best way to deliver water for the present and future needs of the Greater Vernon Water Utility in a sustainable and economically feasible way. For me, economic feasibility is always something that the politicians should be considering. So for this, it's necessary to understand the whole picture. The decision that GVAC had made, so in February, they had already voted they chose one of the options that was given to them as a Master Water Plan option, and that option that they chose would have required us to invest $111 million over the next 6 to 8 years. $70 million that we're going to referendum for is just phase 1. One of the first steps in phase 1 is to build a huge capacity filtration plant at Duto Creek. And over 90% of the filtered water will be wasted on fields. The financial burden to be placed on domestic, commercial, industrial, and institutional customers is too much. The consequences are too devastating. So I said to the politicians, this decision deserves more consideration because the consequences are very drastic. And it is probably the single most important decision that will affect the economic viability of this valley forever. We're at a crossroads, and you'll see why as I go on in this presentation. So for that, we must look at the big picture. And to me, the big picture is interdisciplinary. You have to look at not just the engineering. So the factors that affect the big picture are the bedrock geology, the glacial history, the irrigation history, the agricultural land reserve history, then the Greater Vernon water utility history, the Drinking Water Protection Act, the 2004 Master Water Plan Amendment, and then the completion of the Duto Creek Water Treatment Plant in the fall of 2010, the effect on Greater Vernon water rates, and the loss of economic viability for agriculture and water-intensive businesses. So starting with the geology, because I'm a geologist and I like geology, this is a typical cross-section across the Okanagan Valley. And the Okanagan Valley is an elongate northeast-southwest trending valley that's approximately 45 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide. And that valley is fault controlled. So there's a very deep fault called the Okanagan Fault. And that gives a lot of the characteristics to Okanagan Lake and Kalamata Lake that we see. So it's a complex geological situation. But what we have is Kalamata Lake and Okanagan Lake are very deep lakes, partly because they're along this fault. So at their deepest, Kalamata Lake is 142 meters deep and Okanagan Lake is 230 meters deep. And this, by contrast, the other water source, Grizzly Lake and Aberdeen Lake, the reservoirs that supply Haddo Lake, so these are the Duto ones, they're small and shallow and located in a more stable geological area. So they're on the Nicolin Lake Pluton and the Aberdeen Gneiss Complex. And basically, the lakes, I don't have a pointer, but there's Aberdeen Lake and Haddo Lake and Grizzly Swamp and Grizzly Lake. You know, so they're swampy lakes. They're about, Haddo Lake is about 12 meters deep. So it's a very different geological environment between these upper plateau lakes. They're at high elevation versus the elongate, structurally controlled lakes like Okanagan and Kalamata Lake. So this is a bigger picture of the geologic map, and you can see how big Kalamata Lake looks compared to the Aberdeen Plateau lakes. So moving on from that, now you have that in mind, but you have the glacial history, which is much younger than the geologic history. So 2 million years ago to 9,000 years ago, we had glaciers in this valley. So the Ice Age started in the Pleistocene epoch about 2 million years ago. The youngest glaciation of about 4 to 6 pulses is called the Fraser glaciation. Ice to 3,000 meters thick in the center of Okanagan Lake was found, so 17,500 years ago or so. On retreat, Glacial Lake Penticton covered the present lake valleys to 100 meters above present levels. So Penticton, Kelowna, Vernon, Coldstream, and Armstrong would all be underwater. Our valley and landforms are shaped by the ice and the retreating water that cover most of the bedrock. So this is a depiction of the height of the last glacial advance. About 14,500 years ago, the ice sheet covered just to the Canada-US border. So when ice retreats, it leaves certain landforms, and glacial valleys are typically U-shaped, and they have features from the retreating ice and the water melt. There are things like eskers and drumlins and alluvial fans. Lots of gravel is deposited, and this is what the typical valley looks like. So when we look around us here, so this is just one example, there are many, many of them as you drive down to Kelowna, but this is the Golf and Country Club, so going to Kalamata Lake Road, sort of, you can see the flat area is the golf course, and those terraces above are glacial terraces, and they're made of unsorted gravels, and there's houses at the top, so this is very near the college up here. So that's actually a glacial landform. Now the Coldstream Valley looks very much like that other valley that I showed you that was a glacial valley. It's a U-shaped valley, and that's a long time ago. So there was a glacier that was receding towards the Monashee Mountains. And how do we know all this? There's been some recent work done. So in 1990, some geologists decided to run a seismic section on Kalanaka Lake to see how the bedrock looked and how deep the gravels might be. And what they found was actually quite interesting. So I said already that Kalanaka Lake is quite deep, it's 142 meters deep. But beyond that, there's another 272 meters of gravel at its deepest before you hit the bedrock. So the bedrock at the bottom of Kalanaka Lake is actually 26 meters below sea level, because the elevation of this area here is about 391 meters at the top of the lake. So when you go from that elevation down the 272 meters plus 142 meters, you actually are going below sea level. So there's a lot of gravel. And the seismic section, you can see what it is it's sound waves, and when they run the seismic, the waves go at a different speed in different substrates. So in the water it looks different, and then it'll show you the margin to the gravel, and then it'll show you the margin to the bedrock. And that's how it looks. And so nature provides a natural filter. There's very thick gravels at the bottom of Kalanaka Lake and Okanagan Lake. A large percentage of the recharge of Kal Lake and Okanagan Lake comes from underground springs. The water from the underground springs is filtered by nature through the gravels deposited by glaciers. So in conclusion, due to these factors, the Kalanaka Lake water source makes a cheaper and better quality source of drinking water than the Duto source. And I'll expand. So the man-made irrigation history is then the next level of things we should consider. That's 100 years ago or so. So the present-day Okanagan Basin is the driest per capita water basin in Canada. And this is what the basin looks like. You can see Okanagan Lake. And the watershed area is 6,187 square kilometers, and it receives 55 centimeters of rain per year. The watershed is divided into these 17 sub-basins, or nested watersheds, and the largest of which is Mission Creek. Kalanaka Lake watershed is also known as the Vernon Creek watershed. Duto, on the other hand, is diverted from the Shuswap Basin, so it is actually outside of the Okanagan Basin itself. There's more rain in the Shuswap area. So experts agree that 70% of the water used in the Okanagan Basin is for agricultural production. So this is a slide that I borrowed from the UBC Faculty of Land and Food Systems Professor Hans Schreier. So 100 or so years ago, this is the cairn that's up at the lookout that commemorates the work done by Vernon Irrigation District engineers. They were very smart. They knew the valley was dry, and they created the ditches at the Great Canal, basically diverted the water from the Shuswap watershed and greened up this valley. So this is the history of the water license diversion. So 1906 was the first license. So the irrigation history is similar up and down the Okanagan Valley. Prior to irrigation, a now lush area of Kelowna was known as a dry valley road, or Starvation Flats. It's now called Glenmore. So that's what Glenmore looks like now. So it is a dry valley, despite the fact that it looks like there's a lot of water, because we have these large lakes that are really prehistoric glaciers, right? However, the province's physiography has rendered it one of Canada's richest and most diverse provinces, but it's a have-not province agriculturally, because over 90% of the province is covered by mountains or has an elevation over 1,000 meters. So these nice little valleys that we live in are precious. So because of BC's rugged topography and scarcity of good agricultural land, the Agricultural Land Reserve was legislated in 1973. So up to the 1970s, nearly 6,000 hectares acres of prime agricultural land were lost each year to urban and other uses. The provincial government responded to the serious erosion of our agricultural land by introducing the BC Land Commissions Act in 1973. So only 5% of BC's land is suitable for farming. So this map is the province, and the little green parts are the ALR. Of that, like only 1% of that has the best soil with the highest capability for growing crops in a good climate. So this is our valley, taken in 2011. And further than that, the land suitable for tree fruit production in the ALR is only 0.04% of BC's land base. And we're lucky enough to have quite a bit of that in the ALR and the North Okanagan. At one time, the Coldstream Valley actually had the largest apple orchard in the English British Commonwealth. And so they can grow, like it can grow hay, but it can also grow apples and cherries, all kinds of fruit. So the soil classification map also shows the class 1 and class 2 soils. So those are the ones that are in the dark brown and the buff brown, and it looks like an L or a C shape. And that mirrors the old VID geometry. So the Vernon Irrigation District, when they built the Great Canal and those ditches, they knew where the good soil was, and that's what they targeted. So the Greater Vernon Water Utility water supply pre-2002, you know, basically in 2002 when it came together, it was the Vernon Irrigation District, the North Okanagan Water Authority, NOAA, and the domestic supplies for Vernon and Coldstream. So the agricultural potential is entirely dependent on irrigation. This is a picture that I took one September coming home from Victoria, and you can see how dry it looks from the air. So the areas that are green are irrigated, the brown is what it would look like naturally. So in the late 1900, or 1990, a master water plan was commissioned, and it resulted in the creation of the Greater Vernon Water Utility. In 2002, that master water plan recommended a complete separation of agriculture and domestic water was the most beneficial way to go